The darkness of space had always been an endless expanse of wonder and mystery, a vast canvas stretching across the known universe, full of untapped potential. For centuries, humanity had looked up at the stars, dreaming of what lay beyond. But when humanity finally reached out, it was not wonder that awaited them, but something far darker. Betrayal, a cosmic conspiracy spanning centuries, had been waiting in the shadows, patiently waiting for the day when the veil would finally be lifted. Humanity's first contact with alien life had not been a moment of joy, but of uneasy recognition. When the mysterious, towering alien species known as the Teverii first approached Earth, they offered knowledge, technology, and an alliance. They claimed to be the protectors of the galaxy, offering humans a place among the stars. They promised peace, unity, and the guidance of ancient civilizations who had long since surpassed the wild dreams of Earth's inhabitants. Eager to join this intergalactic federation of peace and progress, humanity accepted, but at the cost of their sovereignty. The first years were filled with wonder. Humans marveled at the alien technologies they were given, technologies far beyond anything their world had known: clean energy, faster than light travel, and medical advancements that cured diseases that had once plagued their kind. For the first time in human history, the future seemed limitless. The Teverii opened gateways to distant star systems, inviting Earth's finest minds and brightest explorers to join them in colonizing new worlds. The galaxy, with all its alien races and strange wonders, beckoned like a dream. But as time passed, cracks began to appear in the facade of their benevolent alien allies. First, it was the secrets. The technology that the Teverii shared with humanity was always incomplete, limited, and frequently altered in subtle ways. The pristine worlds they allowed humans to colonize were never truly free. They were filled with hidden dangers, ancient traps, and lethal predators, as if the planets had been designed to be as beautiful as they were inhospitable. Then came the whispers. Small, scattered rumors circulating among the deepest reaches of space where the Teverei's control was weakest. Secretly, certain human factions, isolated from the core of the alliance, began to discover traces of a darker truth hidden behind the veneer of the Teverei's utopia. The Teverei's vast empire, it seemed, had not been one of peace. Instead, it had been built on exploitation, manipulation, and a horrifying secret: the Teverii were not the benevolent protectors of the galaxy, but rather a brutal and ancient species that had enslaved countless civilizations across the stars for millennia, using them to fuel their own advancement and power. Humanity was no different. Earth was just another planet in the Teverei's ever-expanding collection of subjugated worlds. And the truth was far more disturbing than anything humanity could have imagined. It wasn't just that the Teverii had been manipulating Earth's leaders for decades, or that they had secretly engineered humanity's rise into the galactic stage for their own purposes. It was the fact that the Teverii had long known that the human race was destined to be different, a wild card that had the potential to threaten their entire empire. And so, they had set in motion a plan so insidious that it would take humanity years to even begin to comprehend it. It started with a series of mysterious disappearances. Key individual scientists, diplomats, military leaders vanished from their posts, often without a trace. Families were left to grieve, governments were forced to cover up the absences, and the general populace had no clue what was really going on. It wasn't until a small group of human researchers on a remote colony stumbled upon an encrypted Teverii database, hidden deep within a derelict station at the edge of known space, that the truth began to emerge. The database revealed a chilling message: the Teverii had been secretly manipulating the course of human history from the very beginning. They had not only engineered humanity's rise to power among the stars, but had also altered key events in Earth's past to ensure humanity's dependence on them. Every step of humanity's progress, every new discovery, had been orchestrated by the Teverii, all to bring humans into their fold, an empire that would eventually collapse if the Teverii were not able to maintain control over their so-called allies. The humans who uncovered the database, led by a brilliant and determined scientist named Dr. Emilia Voss, immediately recognized the enormity of what they had discovered. The truth had to be shared with the rest of humanity. They couldn't allow the Teverii to continue their manipulations, to let them turn Earth into just another cog in their destructive empire. Dr. Voss and her team began gathering allies, reaching out to the pockets of humanity who had long suspected something was wrong. Soon, a resistance began to form, a loose coalition of renegade ships, rogue diplomats, and disillusioned military leaders who had come to see the Teverii for what they truly were, a malignant force, one that had used the promise of peace to mask their true intentions. But they were not the only ones who had uncovered the truth. The Teverii, always one step ahead, were aware of the breach, and they were preparing their response. The resistance had underestimated just how deeply the Teverii had infiltrated every level of human society, from the highest echelons of government to the smallest merchant ship. They had built a vast network of spies and informants, ready to act at a moment's notice. As Dr. Voss and her team raced against time to expose the Teverei's plan to the public, they were forced to make a difficult decision. There could be no negotiation, no chance of reconciliation. The Teverii were beyond redemption. The human race could never coexist with a species so deeply entrenched in its own empire of control and deceit. For the sake of humanity's future, they had to be stopped. And if the galaxy was to have any hope of recovering from the Teverei's reign, the humans would have to fight for their very survival. A series of covert strikes were launched against key Teverii strongholds, not to capture or negotiate, but to disable their vast systems of control. The first target was a Teverii data center located in the heart of a remote planet's moon, a facility where human memories had been altered and erased to maintain loyalty to the Teverei's will. The team managed to infiltrate the base and expose the gruesome truth. Not only had the Teverii been tampering with human minds, but they had also been experimenting on their own soldiers, implanting false memories and reprogramming their emotions to create perfect, unthinking agents. This discovery was enough to ignite a firestorm across the galaxy. The Teverii, once regarded as infallible and godlike by many, now found themselves facing a united front of angry, vengeful species. However, as the truth spread, it became clear that the resistance had underestimated just how vast the Teverei's influence was. Worlds that had long been loyal to the Teverii began to question their allegiance, but the Teverii, seeing their empire crumble, would stop at nothing to maintain control. The war for the galaxy had begun. As the first shots were fired, humanity had no choice but to fight alongside the resistance they had so long been a part of, and soon the conflict spread like wildfire. The Teverei's true nature, now exposed for all to see, was the rallying cry that united countless species against their former overlords. But as the fighting intensified, so did the realization that the galaxy was far from ready for such a battle. The Teverii, ruthless in their desire to maintain dominance, unleashed horrors beyond anything the universe had ever known. On the battlefield, humanity's soldiers fought with a ferocity that had been honed on Earth. Every weapon, every strategy, every ounce of will they had ever known was brought to bear against the Teverii war machines. But the cost of this war was immeasurable. Planets burned. Cities were reduced to rubble. Lives were lost. Dr. Voss, once a scientist seeking to expose the truth, now found herself at the head of the human resistance, leading a ragtag fleet of ships that had once been part of the Teverii-controlled colonies. She became the symbol of the fight for freedom, but in the quiet moments between battles, she couldn't escape the guilt that weighed heavily on her heart. Had humanity truly been better off in the Teverei's hands, or had the galaxy always been destined for this conflict? The final confrontation came when the Teverii, cornered and desperate, revealed their ultimate weapon, a weapon so powerful that it could destroy entire solar systems with a single strike. The weapon, called the Dreadfall Engine, was buried deep within the heart of the Teverei's capital world, a world they had once promised humanity would be a peaceful center of galactic unity. It was here that the final battle would take place. The Resistance's last hope rested on a single strike to destroy the Dreadfall Engine, and with it, the Teverei's hold on the galaxy. Dr. Voss and her team, joined by human forces and allied species, infiltrated the Teverii stronghold with the goal of sabotaging the weapon before it could be deployed. But as they made their way through the dark corridors of the Teverii capital, they encountered something even more horrifying than they had anticipated: an army of human soldiers, enslaved by the Teverii, their minds wiped clean, their wills shattered. The Teverii had been using these soldiers as their last line of defense, manipulating them into believing they were fighting for a noble cause. The final confrontation was not one of weapons or technology, but of willpower. Dr. Voss, standing at the heart of the Teverei's empire, realized that the true victory was not in destroying the Dreadfall engine, but in liberating those who had been forced into this nightmare. She couldn't undo the past, but she could help create a future free from the chains of betrayal. And so, with a final act of defiance, Dr. Voss detonated the Dreadfall engine, shattering the Teverei's empire and sending a message that would echo throughout the galaxy: forgiveness was not an option. Only the fight for freedom remained. And humanity, no longer Na'vi, would never again bow to the false promises of those who would seek to control them. The explosion of the Dreadfall engine sent ripples through the very fabric of the galaxy. It was a seismic shift in the cosmic balance, a thunderous shockwave that resonated through the hearts and minds of every sentient being within the Teverii Empire. The explosion wasn't just the end of a weapon, it was the death knell of an empire built on lies, manipulation, and betrayal. The Teverei's reign of terror had been severed at its core. Dr. Amelia Voss stood in the crumbling heart of the Teverii capital, breathing heavily, her fingers still clutching the detonator, now a useless piece of metal. Around her, the resistance fighters were in the thick of a brutal battle, but they had already won the war. The Teverii were no longer a threat. Their power had been shattered, their structures crumbled, their soldiers either defeated or in the process of being liberated. And yet, in the aftermath, there was no sense of triumph. Only exhaustion and the bitter taste of betrayal that clung to the air. The Teverei's capital, once a symbol of their unchallenged supremacy, was now a wasteland. Massive cities that had once glistened with the technology of 1,000 worlds lay in ruins. Skyscrapers that had touched the heavens now lay twisted and burned, their once stunning architecture reduced to rubble. The streets were littered with the debris of the final battle, and the skies were dark with the smoke of the fallen Teverii ships that had once ruled the stars. Dr. Voss, however, wasn't looking at the destruction around her. Her eyes were focused on the survivors, the humans and alien species who had fought alongside them. The cost of this victory had been unimaginable. Thousands of lives had been lost. Families had been torn apart. Entire colonies had been destroyed. And now, as the dust settled, she couldn't help but wonder if the galaxy was truly ready for what came next. The truth had been laid bare. The Teverii were not the benevolent overseers they had once claimed to be. They were conquerors ruthless and uncaring who had used humanity as a pawn in a far greater game. The galaxy had suffered under their rule, and now, with the empire shattered, there was a gaping void. A vacuum of power, ready to be filled by anyone brave or foolish enough to step forward. Humanity was now free, but at what cost? They had been pulled into a war they hadn't fully understood, and the scars of that conflict would linger for generations. There would be no easy road to peace, no grand reconciliation. The damage done was far too great. "We've done it," said Captain Marcus Quinn, one of the leaders of the resistance, his voice hoarse from the battle. His face was streaked with dirt, his uniform torn, but his eyes gleamed with a mix of pride and sorrow. "The Teverii are finished. Their empire is gone." Dr. Voss nodded slowly, her gaze still distant. "Yes, but the galaxy is not healed. We've only just begun to see the consequences of what we've done." Quinn glanced around, taking in the destruction, the fallen bodies, both human and alien. "We'll rebuild. We'll make sure the galaxy knows the truth. We can't let their empire rise again." Voss' eyes flicked over to the nearby horizon, where the remnants of Teverii warships were drifting in space like ghostly wreckage. "We won't let it rise. But the truth is harder to swallow than any war. We've destroyed an empire. But now, we need to ask ourselves, what kind of galaxy are we going to build in its place? Before Quinn could respond, the voice of the Resistance's communications officer crackled over the radio, breaking the tense silence. "Dr. Voss, Captain Quinn, you need to hear this." The two exchanged a glance before Voss made her way to the officer, a young human woman named Liera. "What is it?" Liera's face was tense, her eyes wide as she looked up from her console. "We've received a transmission from what's left of the Tverii Senate. It's not what we expected." Voss' heart skipped a beat. The Tverii Senate? They had assumed the entire leadership structure had collapsed along with the Empire. The Tverii were supposed to be broken, scattered, no longer a threat. But now, this could change everything. "Put it through," Voss ordered, her voice steady despite the storm brewing in her chest. A crackling image appeared on the screen. At first, it was difficult to make out. The transmission was distorted, flickering in and out, but then the image sharpened. A Tverii figure stood before them, a creature tall and imposing, with the characteristic elongated limbs and gleaming eyes. But unlike the others they had encountered, this one was different. There was a coldness in its eyes, a calculating intelligence that made the hairs on the back of Voss's neck stand on end. "Dr. Voss," the Tverii figure spoke, its voice smooth and almost soothing, but there was an underlying menace. "You have won, but the war is far from over." Voss frowned, her pulse quickening. "Who are you?" The Tverii figure tilted its head slightly, as though surprised by the question. "I am High Commander Krall, the last of the Tverii leadership. What remains of our Senate is in disarray. But I come to offer you a final proposition." A chill ran through Voss's veins. She knew this wasn't going to be a simple surrender. There was something in the way Krall spoke, and the confident, almost smug tone, that suggested something far darker was at play. "You've destroyed our empire, Dr. Voss," Krall continued, his eyes narrowing. "But in doing so, you have opened the door to something far worse. The galaxy is on the brink of chaos. There will be no peace in the wake of this destruction. The war is not over. It is only beginning." Quinn moved forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sidearm. "What do you want?" Krall's lips curled into a thin smile. "What I want is simple. You cannot win this war. You cannot destroy what is already beyond your reach. We were not just conquerors, Dr. Voss. We were the last line of defense against something far worse. We were holding back an ancient enemy, one that no galaxy has ever truly understood." Voss' eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" Krall's voice grew more intense. The Tverii Empire was not a force of tyranny for the sake of tyranny. It was a necessary evil. We kept the galaxy in check because we knew what would happen if we failed. There are things beyond the stars, ancient forces, that seek only destruction. And you, Dr. Voss, you have just removed the last safeguard against them." The transmission flickered, and Krall's image seemed to distort, as though the very fabric of the broadcast was struggling to hold together. "You may have destroyed us, but there are others. Worse. And now, the galaxy will learn the true meaning of chaos." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. The implications of what Krall had said hung heavily in the air, suffocating any sense of victory the Resistance might have felt. Voss stood frozen, her mind reeling. This isn't over. There's something else out there." Quinn's face darkened. "We knew the Tverii weren't the only threat. But what Krall said, if there's something worse out there, we need to prepare." "Prepare?" Voss said, her voice sharp. "We're not just going to prepare. We need to find out what's coming. And we need to stop it before it's too late." The war against the Tverii had only been the beginning. And now, humanity faced an even greater challenge, one that would test their very survival. The galaxy was on the verge of unraveling, and the true enemy was still out there, waiting in the dark. The air on the Tverii capital was thick with tension, the remnants of the final battle still smoldering in the distance. Dr. Voss stood before the communications console, the weight of High Commander Krall's words pressing heavily on her chest. The war against the Teverii had felt like the ultimate struggle, one that they had just barely won, but now she understood that the galaxy's fate was far from settled. The message from Krall had left an unsettling impression. The Teverii had been the galaxy's so-called protectors against an ancient, unseen force. Now, without their empire, the galaxy was vulnerable. And while humanity had just emerged from the ashes of the Teverii's control, it was becoming clear that they were no longer simply fighting for freedom. They were fighting for survival. "I don't trust him," Captain Quinn said, his voice low, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the wreckage outside the windows of the command center. Krall's words may have been a bluff. "He's trying to scare us into surrendering." Voss shook her head, her mind racing. "It's not a bluff." He was too sure of himself. "He's not just a vanquished enemy. He's a survivor, and survivors know when they've been cornered." She paced the room, her thoughts jumbled. There was something Krall had said that stuck in her mind, the mention of a galaxy-spanning threat, an ancient enemy that even the Teverii had been powerless to stop. The more she thought about it, the more she felt the creeping suspicion that this enemy was not a mere rumor, a myth to keep the Teverii in control. It was real. "Have you been able to trace the transmission?" Voss asked Liara, who was hunched over her console, fingers flying across the keys. Liara nodded grimly, her brow furrowing. "We've tried, but the signal was too heavily scrambled. It's almost as if it was intentionally designed to be untraceable. Whoever or whatever Krall's referring to is far more sophisticated than anything we've encountered." The room fell silent. The enormity of the situation was slowly sinking in. The war against the Teverii might have been won, but a new threat, one even more terrifying, was looming just beyond the stars. Dr. Voss straightened, her expression hardening. "We don't have the luxury of time. If what Krall said is true, we need to prepare for whatever's coming. If the Teverii were the last line of defense, we need to figure out exactly what we're facing, and fast." Quinn stepped forward, his gaze intense. "I'll organize a fleet. We can take the fight to whoever is out there before they get a chance to strike." Voss shook her head. "It's not going to be that simple. We need information first. We need to understand what kind of force we're dealing with. I've heard rumors, whispers, really, that the Teverii weren't just fighting for control of the galaxy. They were protecting something. Something powerful. We need to find out what that is." Her mind raced back to the countless hours she had spent poring over ancient texts, alien databases, and Teverii archives. Somewhere, buried deep within the archives, there had to be something, a clue, a lead, anything that could explain the true nature of this unseen enemy. But where? Where could they begin? "We'll have to go through the Teverii archives," Voss decided. "The ones on their homeworld. Krall mentioned that they were holding back something. It's likely there are records we haven't accessed yet, records that explain exactly what they were guarding against." Quinn's expression darkened. "That's risky. Their capital is in ruins. There could still be traps, hidden defenses, or worse." "I know," Voss said quietly, her voice unwavering. "But if we don't do this, we won't be prepared for what's coming. We need to understand the threat before we can fight it." The decision was made. A small but highly skilled team would infiltrate what was left of the Teverii capital. They would access the deepest level of their archives, hidden beneath layers of rubble and debris, and unearth whatever secrets the Teverii had been so desperate to keep. The team, a mix of human resistance fighters and alien allies, set out from the command center, boarding a fleet of stealth ships designed for covert operations. Dr. Voss, Quinn, and Liara would lead the team, but there was a cold tension in the air. Everyone knew that what they were about to do could change the course of the galaxy. And there was no guarantee they would survive. The journey to the heart of the Teverii capital was harrowing. The once glorious city was now a crumbling ruin, its once gleaming spires reduced to charred skeletons. Broken ships floated aimlessly in space, their hulls torn open by the final battle. As they neared the central archive, Voss couldn't help but feel a deep unease. She had spent so many years learning about the Teverii, about their empire, but now she was standing on the edge of something far darker than anything she could have imagined. The team landed in a narrow, abandoned sector of the capital. The silence was deafening, the air thick with dust and the stench of decay. They moved cautiously, weapons drawn, their footsteps echoing through the shattered streets. The archive, buried deep beneath the surface of the planet, was their destination, but every corner they turned felt like a new potential threat. Once they reached the entrance to the archive, a heavy steel door covered in ancient Teverii symbols loomed before them. Voss stepped forward, running her fingers over the markings. The symbols seemed familiar, but there was something different about them now, an urgency in their shape, a pattern that felt like it was trying to tell her something. "Here," she said, pressing a series of sequences into a hidden panel beside the door. The lock clicked open, and the massive door groaned as it slowly slid aside. Inside was a vault that had been preserved for centuries. The room was vast, filled with shelves upon shelves of Teverii data records. Voss stepped forward, scanning the rows with a trained eye. Her fingers traced the edges of the data files, each one a potential clue to understanding what the Teverii had known, what they had been guarding, and what Krall had been referring to. She pulled out a thick, ancient tome from one of the lower shelves, the cover adorned with symbols she couldn't immediately place. Opening it, she found pages upon pages of cryptic writing, the language intricate and alien, but familiar enough for her to decipher. As her eyes skimmed the pages, her stomach clenched. It wasn't just the Teverii who had been trying to protect the galaxy. The archive revealed the existence of an ancient, dormant species, a race older than any other, one that had predated even the Teverii themselves. This race, known as the Vorshi, had been nearly wiped out millennia ago, but not before they had left behind a terrible legacy, a weapon of unimaginable power, buried deep within the heart of a distant star system. The Vorshi had created the Teverii as part of an ancient pact, a last-ditch effort to protect the galaxy from their own creation, the Vorshi's weapon. The Teverii had been guarding the weapon, ensuring that no one could access it. But now, with their empire broken, the key to this ancient weapon was in the hands of whoever could reach the Vorshi's last stronghold. The weight of this discovery hit Voss like a ton of bricks. This weapon, this Vorshi technology, had the potential to reshape the galaxy. But in the wrong hands, it could bring about the destruction of everything. Krall's warning echoed in her mind, the war is not over. "Everyone, get ready," Voss said, her voice tight with the gravity of their discovery. "We're going to need to act fast. We've just uncovered the location of a weapon that could destroy everything we've fought for." Quinn looked at her, his jaw tightening. "You're saying we need to find it before someone else does?" "Exactly," Voss replied. "And we need to make sure that whoever gets to it first is ready to stop it." The team gathered their equipment, ready for the next phase of their mission. The stakes had never been higher. They were no longer just fighting for freedom, they were fighting for the future of the entire galaxy. And the real battle was only just beginning.